Coco and her best friend Mia were ecstatic. They had both landed interviews at their dream company, and to celebrate, they decided to hit the town. The night was filled with laughter, dancing, and perhaps a few too many drinks. The next morning, Coco woke up with a pounding headache in an unfamiliar hotel room. She glanced around, realizing she wasn't alone. A man was in the shower, and she had no memory of how she ended up there. Panic set in as she remembered her job interview that morning. She quickly dressed, grabbed her things, and dashed out of the room, leaving behind one of her earrings in her haste. Coco arrived at the office just in time, her heart racing. She tried to compose herself as she waited for her interview. When she was finally called in, behind the desk, it was James Dean, the company's CEO. Coco's interview with James Dean went better as she hoped. Her skills and experience shone through, and she was offered the job. However, the position required her to relocate to another town. Eager to start her new career, Coco accepted the offer and moved. Days turned into weeks, and Coco settled into her new life. She excelled at her job, quickly making a name for herself. But soon, she began to feel unwell, though could be something she ate, went for a checkup and discovered she was pregnant. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying, as she had no idea who the father could be. The memory of that night was a blur, and she hadn't seen the man since. Months passed, and Coco gave birth to a beautiful baby boy she named Junior. As Junior grew, it became clear he was an exceptionally clever child. He also bore a striking resemblance to his father, a man Coco had never seen again. Coco's career continued to flourish. Her dedication and hard work earned her a promotion to a higher position within the company. She was proud of her achievements and the life she was building for herself and Junior. Meanwhile, James Dean couldn't shake the memory of the mysterious woman from that night. He often found himself thinking about her, wondering who she was and what had become of her. To cope, he threw himself into his work, becoming even more focused and driven. James had a scheduled meeting at the branch where Coco worked. After a productive day of discussions and planning, the managerial team decided to go out for dinner to unwind. The atmosphere was lively, with everyone enjoying their drinks and sharing stories. James noticed that Coco wasn't drinking, and curious, he asked, "Are you not having anything, Coco?" Coco smiled politely and replied, "No, James. I stopped drinking 10 years ago." "Really? Why?" James asked, puzzled. "It's a long story," Coco said, her eyes reflecting a mix of emotions. "I'd like to hear that story someday," James said with a warm smile. Coco's eyes lit up, and her dimples appeared as she smiled back. In that moment, something clicked in James's mind. The way she smiled, the light in her eyes, it all seemed so familiar. He began to remember the mysterious woman from that night years ago. "You remind me of someone," James said softly, his voice trailing off as he became lost in thought. The silence at the table was palpable, but it was soon broken by the clinking of glasses and the hum of conversation. James couldn't shake the feeling that he knew Coco from somewhere, but he decided to let it go for the moment and enjoy the evening. As the dinner progressed, James and Coco found themselves seated next to each other. They talked about work, their interests, and shared a few laughs. The more they talked, the more James felt a connection, a sense of familiarity that he couldn't quite place. At one point, James leaned in and said, "You know, Coco, there's something about you that feels so familiar. It's like we've met before." Coco's heart skipped a beat. She had been thinking the same thing but wasn't sure how to bring it up. The earring that James kept was a small, delicate piece of jewelry. It was a simple yet elegant silver hoop with a tiny, sparkling gemstone embedded in it. The earring had a unique design that made it stand out, and it was something Coco cherished. On the night they met, Coco had worn the earrings as a part of her celebration outfit. In her rush to leave the hotel room the next morning, she had accidentally left one behind. James found it and, for some reason, felt compelled to keep it. It became a symbol of that mysterious night and the woman he couldn't forget. Over the years, James often looked at the earring, wondering about the woman who had left it behind. It was a constant reminder of a night filled with possibilities and unanswered questions. Junior grew up to be an exceptional young man. He had a natural talent for football and quickly became one of the best players on his school team. His skills on the field were matched by his academic excellence. Junior was a top student, always eager to learn and excel in his studies. His hard work paid off when he received a scholarship to a prestigious university, where he could pursue both his academic and athletic dreams. Coco's life was a balancing act between her demanding job and taking care of Junior. She was incredibly proud of her son and supported him in every way she could. Despite the challenges, she managed to excel at work and be there for Junior, ensuring he had everything he needed to succeed. One day, while waiting for a flight at the airport, Coco found herself seated next to an elderly woman. They struck up a brief conversation, sharing stories about their lives. The woman, whose name was Margaret, was kind and full of wisdom. Suddenly, Margaret fainted, causing a commotion. Coco immediately called for help and stayed by Margaret's side until the paramedics arrived. Remembering their conversation, Coco provided the paramedics with Margaret's name and other details she had gathered. This information was crucial in ensuring Margaret received the proper care quickly. After the commotion at the airport, Coco stayed with Margaret at the hospital, waiting for her relatives to arrive. She felt a sense of responsibility and wanted to ensure the elderly woman was safe. She sat in the waiting room, the door opened, and to her surprise, James walked in. "Mr. Dean!" Coco exclaimed, shocked to see him. James turned to Coco, his eyes wide with recognition. "Coco, what are you doing here?" As James rushed to Margaret's side. "Mum, are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Margaret smiled weakly. "I'm fine, thanks to this wonderful woman," she said, gesturing towards Coco. "She is the woman who saved my life," Margaret interjected. "Please, I want to thank her properly." James looked at Coco with gratitude. "Please call me James from now on," he said, his voice softening. "Thank you, Coco. You have no idea how much this means to me." Coco smiled, feeling a mix of emotions. "I'm just glad I could help," she said. "But I guess I should be going now." A few weeks later, Coco continued with her busy life, balancing work and taking care of Junior. She couldn't stop thinking about the encounter with James and his mother. It felt like fate had brought them together again. One day, Coco received a call from James. He wanted to meet and properly thank her for what she had done. They agreed to meet for coffee, and as they sat down, they talked about everything that had happened since their last meeting. James was impressed by Coco's strength and resilience. He admired how she had raised Junior on her own while excelling in her career. Coco, in turn, saw a different side of James, a caring son and a dedicated professional. Their conversation flowed easily, and they both felt a connection that went beyond their shared past. From time to time, Coco would call Mrs. Dean to check on her. Their conversations were always warm and filled with genuine care. Mrs. Dean appreciated Coco's kindness and often looked forward to their chats. One day, Mrs. Dean invited Coco to dinner at their house. Coco was a bit nervous but accepted the invitation, feeling it was a good opportunity to get to know James's family better. When Coco arrived at the Dean's home, she was warmly welcomed. The house was cozy and inviting, filled with the comforting aroma of a home-cooked meal. As they sat down for dinner, the conversation flowed easily. James, his mother, and Coco shared stories and laughter, creating a pleasant and relaxed atmosphere. During the dinner, James took the opportunity to learn more about Coco and her life with Junior. Coco spoke fondly of her son, sharing anecdotes about his achievements in football and academics. She beamed with pride as she talked about his scholarship and how he was growing into a remarkable young man. Although Coco didn't mention Junior's father, the Deans respected her privacy and didn't press the issue. They understood that some parts of her life were personal and chose to focus on the present and the future. As the evening went on, James found himself even more drawn to Coco. He admired her strength, resilience, and the love she had for her son. Mrs. Dean also saw the special bond forming between them and was happy to see her son opening up to someone who had become so important to their family. James began attending more meetings at the branch where Coco worked, and the staff started to notice. One day, as Coco sat at her desk, she overheard two colleagues chatting in the corridor. "Have you noticed Mr. Dean has been coming to this branch often?" one colleague said. "Yeah, and I've noticed his character has changed as well," the other replied. Coco was curious. She wondered how James's character had changed. Just then, her phone rang. It was James. "What are you doing this weekend? Can we go out, the three of us? There's a place I think Junior will love," he said. Coco agreed, and on Saturday morning, James picked up Coco and Junior. They went for a long drive to a beautiful place where they spent the day together. James and Junior played football while Coco watched. Junior was thrilled to spend time with James. From the moment they arrived at the beautiful location, Junior's excitement was palpable. He loved playing football with James, who matched his energy and enthusiasm on the field. They quickly bonded over their shared love for the game, and Junior was impressed by James's skills and knowledge. As James and Junior talked, James saw himself in Junior. They shared similar interests and enjoyed the same activities. Coco noticed the same gestures and mannerisms in both of them, making the connection even more apparent. As they played and talked, Junior felt a sense of connection with James that he hadn't experienced with anyone else. He admired James and enjoyed their conversations, finding it easy to relate to him. The similarities between them, from their interests to their mannerisms, made Junior feel comfortable and understood. Throughout the day, Junior's happiness was evident in his bright smile and laughter. He cherished the time spent with James and looked forward to more moments like these. The experience left a lasting impression on him, deepening his bond with both James and his mother Coco. Watching James and Junior bond during the outing filled Coco with a mix of emotions. She felt a deep sense of joy and contentment seeing her son so happy and engaged. The way Junior's face lit up with excitement and the genuine laughter they shared warmed her heart. Coco also felt a sense of relief. She had always wanted Junior to have a positive male role model in his life, and seeing James step into that role so naturally was reassuring. The similarities between James and Junior, from their shared interests to their mannerisms, made her realize how much they had in common. At the same time, Coco felt a pang of nostalgia and longing. As time passed, James began to cherish the weekends spent with Coco and Junior. Their outings became a regular occurrence, filled with laughter, football games, and heartfelt conversations. James found himself looking forward to these moments, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment and joy. Junior was growing up quickly, and it was soon time for him to attend high school. James suggested that they find a school close by, so they could spend more time together. Coco agreed, and she was also relocated to the main branch, which made it easier for them to be together as a family. With Coco and Junior now closer, they had more opportunities to bond. James and Junior's relationship grew stronger, and Junior began to see James as a father figure. He would often ask James questions about life, growing up, and even seek advice on various matters. James was more than happy to guide him, feeling a deep sense of pride and responsibility. Coco watched their bond with mixed emotions. She was happy to see Junior so close to James, but she also felt a twinge of jealousy and worry. What if one day Junior's real father came back and wanted to claim his child? The thought haunted her, even though she knew that James was the best thing that had happened to them. Despite her worries, Coco couldn't deny the positive impact James had on their lives. She saw how much Junior thrived under James's guidance and how their family dynamic had improved. Coco decided to focus on the present and cherish the moments they had together, hoping that their bond would only grow stronger with time. As Junior grew older, he became more curious about his background and family history. One evening, after a particularly fun day spent with James, Junior approached Coco with a question that had been on his mind for a while. "Mom, can I ask you something?" Junior said, his tone serious. "Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" Coco replied, sensing the importance of the moment. "I've been thinking a lot lately, about my dad. I mean, my biological dad. Who is he? Why isn't he around?" Junior asked, his eyes searching Coco's face for answers. Coco took a deep breath, preparing herself for this conversation. She had always known this day would come. "Junior, your biological father and I met a long time ago, but we lost touch before you were born. He doesn't know about you, and I've raised you on my own since then." Junior nodded, processing the information. "Do you think he'll ever come back? Or want to meet me?" Coco's heart ached at the uncertainty in his voice. "I don't know, Junior. But what I do know is that you have James now. He cares about you so much and has been there for you like a father." Junior smiled, reassured by his mother's words. "Yeah, James is great. I wouldn't mind if he was my dad, he's so cool. I just wanted to know more about where I come from." Junior felt comforted by his mother's words and decided to focus on the present, cherishing the bond he had with both Coco and James. Coco hugged him tightly, feeling a mix of relief and pride. "I understand, Junior. It's natural to be curious about your roots. Just remember, you have a family that loves you very much, and James cares about you deeply. Junior nodded, feeling comforted. Thanks, Mom. I'm really happy with how things are. James is awesome, and so are you. Coco smiled, her heart full. I'm glad to hear that, sweetheart. We're all here for you, no matter what. With that, Junior felt a sense of peace, knowing that he was surrounded by love and support. He decided to focus on the present and the wonderful family he had, cherishing every moment with Coco and James. One evening, after a particularly enjoyable day spent together, James had been planning to ask Coco for her hand in marriage for some time. He wanted to make sure that Junior was comfortable with the idea, knowing how important their bond was. After a heartfelt conversation about family and belonging, James noticed that Junior seemed to have something on his mind. James decided to address it directly. Junior, is there something you want to talk about? He asked gently. Sensing that Junior had something on his mind, James decided to open up the conversation. Junior looked up, a bit hesitant, but then decided to speak. James, I was talking to Mom about my biological dad. I just wanted to know more about where I come from. But honestly, I think you're really cool, and I wouldn't mind if you were my dad. James felt a surge of emotion at Junior's words. He smiled warmly and placed a hand on Junior's shoulder. Junior, that means a lot to me. I care about you very much, and I'm honored that you feel that way. You know, family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who are there for you, who support you and love you. Junior nodded, feeling reassured. Yeah, I get that. And I'm really happy with how things are. I just wanted to know more about my roots. James understood and respected Junior's curiosity. It's natural to want to know about your background. If you ever have any questions or need to talk, I'm here for you. And no matter what, you have a family that loves you very much. Junior looked thoughtful, then smiled back. Thanks, James. That means a lot to me. James took a deep breath, feeling the moment was right. Junior, there's something I want to ask you. How would you feel if I asked your mom to marry me? Junior's eyes widened in surprise, but then a big smile spread across his face. Really? You want to marry Mom? James nodded. Yes, I do. I love her very much, and I love you too. I want us to be a family. Junior's smile grew even wider. I think that would be awesome. I'd love for you to be my dad. James felt a wave of relief and happiness. Thank you, Junior. That means the world to me. But let's keep this our secret for now, he smiled. One afternoon, Mrs. Dean called Coco with an invitation. I have a charity event on Saturday for some kids, she said warmly. Bring along Junior. I'm sure he would enjoy it since there's a football match as well. Did you know James was also very good at football? But the business took most of his time, she added with a laugh. Thank you for the invitation, Mrs. Dean. We'll be there on Saturday, Coco replied, smiling. When Saturday arrived, Coco and Junior headed to the event. The atmosphere was lively, with children playing and families enjoying the day. As they approached, Mrs. Dean's eyes grew wide when she saw Junior. My goodness, she exclaimed, pausing for a moment. You are a very handsome young man, she said, her eyes lingering on Junior as if she wanted to say something more. Mrs. Dean watched Junior with a mix of emotions as he enjoyed himself at the charity event. She couldn't help but notice how much he resembled James at that age. Her curiosity got the better of her, and she asked, How old is he? He's 12 years old, Coco replied with a smile. There was a brief silence, and then Mrs. Dean, who had been listening quietly, asked, Where is his dad? Coco's expression softened. He left before Junior was born, she said. I'm so sorry for that, Mrs. Dean responded, his voice filled with empathy. As the event wound down, Mrs. Dean pulled Coco aside. Thank you for coming, Coco. It means a lot to have you and Junior here. We had a wonderful time. Thank you for inviting us, Coco replied. Mrs. Dean smiled warmly. You and Junior are always welcome. I hope we can do this more often. Mrs. Dean approached Coco and Junior. Please come visit us soon, she said warmly to Junior, who nodded enthusiastically. As Coco and Junior left, Mrs. Dean couldn't stop thinking about how much Junior reminded her of James at that age. She found herself musing aloud, could it be? She quickly dismissed the thought. No, I don't think so. James would have said something. But, as she watched them walk away, she felt a strange sense of anticipation, wondering if the truth would eventually come to light. The resemblance between Junior and James at that age was uncanny, and she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. Determined to find out the truth, she decided to take matters into her own hands and keep it to herself. Over the next few days, Mrs. Dean couldn't stop thinking about Junior. She decided to start by looking through old family photos of James when he was a child. The similarities were striking, and her suspicions grew stronger. She knew she needed more concrete evidence. She couldn't stop thinking about Junior and the striking resemblance he bore to James. Determined to uncover the truth, she devised a plan. She invited Coco and Junior over, suggesting that Junior could help some kids with football. Coco, busy with work, agreed to drop Junior off and pick him up later. This gave Mrs. Dean the perfect opportunity to carry out her plan. She watched Junior closely, waiting for the right moments to collect the necessary samples for a DNA test. When Junior had a drink, she carefully kept the glass he used. Later she suggested a swim. She watched him do a stunt in the pool. One particular one caught her attention. She later kept the brush Junior used on his hair. She discreetly collected a strand of hair from the brush. At the same time, Mrs. Dean felt a pang of guilt for going behind Coco and James's backs. She knew that her actions could have significant consequences, but she believed that the truth was too important to ignore. The secrecy of her plan added to her anxiety, as she carefully collected the glass and the strand of hair without raising any suspicions. With the samples in hand, Mrs. Dean sent them off for DNA testing, all without mentioning anything to James or Coco. Mrs. Dean reached out to a trusted friend who worked in a private investigation firm. She explained the situation and asked for help in discreetly gathering information about Coco and Junior. The investigator agreed and began looking into Coco's background. During the intense investigation, Mrs. Dean experienced a whirlwind of emotions. She felt a deep sense of curiosity and determination, driven by the need to uncover the truth about Junior's parentage. The striking resemblance between Junior and James at that age fueled her suspicions and made her even more resolute in her quest for answers. While waiting for the DNA results, Mrs. Dean was a bundle of nerves and anticipation. She tried to keep herself busy with her usual activities, but her mind constantly drifted back to the potential implications of the test results. Mrs. Dean spent more time in her garden, tending to her flowers and plants. The physical activity and the beauty of nature provided a temporary distraction from her worries. She often found herself reflecting on the past and the potential future. She thought about the impact the results could have on James, Coco, and Junior, and how best to support them regardless of the outcome. Despite her efforts to stay busy, the waiting period was filled with a mix of hope, fear, and anticipation. She knew that the results could change everything, and she braced herself for whatever was to come. After a few days later, the investigator returned with some surprising information. He had managed to obtain a copy of Junior's birth certificate, which listed no father. When Mrs. Dean finally received the DNA test results, her hands trembled as she opened the envelope. The anticipation and anxiety that had built up over the past few days reached a peak. She took a deep breath and read the results. The confirmation that Junior was indeed James's son hit her like a wave. A mix of emotions surged through her, relief, joy, and a profound sense of validation. Her instincts had been right all along. She felt a deep connection to Junior, knowing that he was her grandson. However, alongside the joy, there was also a sense of apprehension. She knew that revealing the truth would change everything for James, Coco, and Junior. Mrs. Dean felt a responsibility to handle the situation delicately, ensuring that the news was shared in a way that would bring them closer together rather than cause any rift. She decided to take a moment to gather her thoughts and plan how to approach the conversation with James and Coco. The truth was out, and now it was time to bring the family together, united by the bond they shared. Mrs. Dean couldn't keep the secret any longer. She decided it was time to tell James the truth about Junior. One evening, she invited James over for tea and sat him down in the living room. "James, there's something important I need to talk to you about," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. James looked at her, sensing the gravity of the moment. "What is it, Mom?" Mrs. Dean took a deep breath and handed him a folder. Inside were photos of Junior and James at the same age, along with the information the investigator had found. "I had some suspicions, and I did a little investigating. James, Junior is your son." James was silent for a moment, his eyes scanning the photos and documents. The resemblance was undeniable, and the evidence was clear. He felt a rush of emotions, shock, joy, and a deep sense of connection. "I need to talk to Coco," he finally said, his voice filled with determination. Mrs. Dean nodded, understanding the weight of the revelation. "Yes, you do. She deserves to know that you know, and Junior deserves to know his father." James left his mother's house with a mix of emotions swirling inside him. He knew this conversation would change everything, but he was ready to embrace the truth and the future it promised. James invited Coco to a quiet, private place where they could talk without interruptions. As he drove to meet her, he took out the earring he had kept for years. Suddenly, he realized there was something familiar about Coco that he couldn't quite pinpoint to that night, even though his instincts had been telling him all along. When they arrived, James led Coco to a secluded spot and sat down with her. He took a deep breath, preparing himself for the conversation. "Coco, there's something very important I need to discuss with you," he began, his voice calm but serious. Coco looked at him, sensing the gravity of his tone. "What is it, James?" James gently took her hand, his eyes filled with sincerity. "My mother did some investigating and got a DNA test done. She found out something that changed everything. Coco, Junior is my son." James gently took her hand, his touch reassuring. James took a deep breath. Coco's reaction to James's revelation was a whirlwind of emotions. Initially, she was stunned, her mind racing to process the information. Her eyes widened in shock, and she felt a mix of surprise, relief, and fear. "What? How?" she managed to say, her voice trembling. James gently took her hand, his touch reassuring. "I know this is a lot to take in." James took a deep breath, preparing to share another important piece of news with Coco. "Coco, there's something else I need to tell you," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Coco looked at him, her eyes filled with curiosity and anticipation. "What is it, James?" "I want to be a part of Junior's life, and I want us to be a family." "Will you marry me, Coco?" James smiled warmly, taking her hands in his. "I had even asked Junior for your hand in marriage. He agreed, but I told him to keep it a secret." Coco's eyes widened in surprise, and then a smile spread across her face. "You did? What did he say?" as she laughed, holding her mouth. "He was thrilled," James replied, his own smile growing. "He said he wouldn't mind if I were his dad and that he thought it would be awesome. It meant the world to me to hear that from him." Tears of joy welled up in Coco's eyes. "James, I don't know what to say. This is all so overwhelming, but in the best way possible." James gently wiped away her tears. "You don't have to say anything right now. Just know that I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you and Junior. Will you marry me, Coco?" Coco nodded, her heart full of happiness. "Yes, James. I will marry you." James pulled her into a warm embrace, feeling a wave of relief and happiness wash over him. "I believe this is yours," he said, smiling as he handed the earring to Coco. "I always kept it, hoping that one day I would meet its owner." Coco's eyes sparkled with gratitude and affection. It was a moment that marked the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, one filled with love, family, and the promise of a beautiful future together. The moral of James and Coco's story is about the power of hope, perseverance, and the belief in destiny. Despite the passage of time and the uncertainty of ever meeting again, James held onto the earring, symbolizing his hope and faith. Their reunion highlights that sometimes, holding onto hope and believing in the possibility of reconnecting with someone special can lead to beautiful and unexpected outcomes. It also underscores the importance of cherishing meaningful moments and the potential for new beginnings filled with love and promise. Thank you for watching Granny G Stories. I hope you enjoy this story. Please don't forget to subscribe for more stories.